Welcome to the No Rain, No Rainbows podcast. This is a show about pushing through obstacles and hard times in order to live a happy and fulfilled life. I'm your host, Ted Phaeton, and it's a pleasure to have you joining us. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Let's grow. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the No Rain, No Rainbows podcast. It's a pleasure to have you today. And as always, a big shout out to my executive producer, Andre Suttles with Subtle Solution, for helping to make this podcast possible. I'm excited. I hope you all are hungry for today's episode because we're going to be serving up some wonderful tips for you. I'm sitting here with John Malik on our Zoom call. John, I appreciate you joining me here today.
Pleasure's all mine, sir.
Definitely. And I did kind of give a little bit of a teaser on what it is you do and some of your expertise when I mentioned, I hope everybody's hungry, but I'd love for you to introduce yourself really quick to our audience if they haven't met you and maybe haven't had the pleasure of tasting some of your delicious food. Give them a quick rundown on your journey and what your expertise is.
So you want me to start in like the delivery ward at the hospital, or what do you think?
Yeah, let's see how much time we have.
So I've been a chef here in Greenville. My wife and I moved here in the mid '90s, right? And spent 5 years as chef at the Augusta Grill from '95 to 2000, and then after that, we opened our own restaurant in 2001 called 33 Liberty, and got kind of famous at the Augusta Grill. I did a little time on Food Network, and I was their flavor of the month for about a year, I guess.
Nice.
And and television's weird. It's kind of ethereal when it comes and goes, and anyway, it went. And so we had our restaurant 33 Liberty, had that for 8 years, did not survive the fall of 2008, the financial crisis. After that, I spent 3 years at the Cascades, which is a fancy retirement community. I was a food and beverage director. And then after that, I got into consulting. I had a job offer about a year after I left the Cascades, and they didn't really need me full time, but they needed somebody to put the pieces together. And so I started. It was my first consulting job, and it was here in Greenville, and did that for about 7 years. And now I'd recently go back to work full time for the Sobeys for Table 301 as the chef of the Loft, which is their private event space.
Nice.
And of course,
yeah,
2008 comes around again, right in the form of 2020. So now I'm back consulting, so.
And I will ask this first question because a lot of our listeners and a lot of the entrepreneurs know how difficult and competitive and hard the restaurant industry can be. And to have a career in that, and especially in consulting, what is it you think is the key? And obviously there's a lot of elements, but you having the chef background, right? And when it comes to running a restaurant, a successful restaurant, what do you think is the key to kind of separate yourself from the others in that regard?
As far as a restaurant goes, or
as far as a restaurant goes, and maybe
right,
even so to the chef aspect as well.
All right. So if you're going to have a successful aspirational restaurant, and when I say aspirational, I mean not necessarily white tablecloth, but if you're going to have a chef-driven with regional cuisine or intriguing cuisine, and you're going to use local ingredients or something like that, then you need to have a voice. Your food should have a voice, and you should have one thing on that menu, one thing that you have fiddled with and doctored and gotten to a point where this is the best representation of this particular dish in town. This is the most intriguing, most dynamic, most craziest, most whatever. But you need to have one thing on that menu that just screams, hey, this is Ted's Grill. Let's go to Ted's Grill. I love Ted's Grill, but I really like that thing that they do, that and whatever that thing is, maybe it's a frozen margarita, or maybe it's a Bloody Mary, or maybe it's a peach cobbler or something. but
Yeah.
you've got to really, you got to have one thing on there that just draws people in,
I love that, because I think that's definitely something that people don't necessarily pay attention to, but I'm sure all of our listeners know that one restaurant that they go to because when they're craving a grilled cheese, for example, they go to this one spot, or when they're
Right.
craving this one dish, they go to this one spot. So it's really almost making that dish your identity, and to be the premier choice when it comes to
Right.
that one dish. How
Right.
do you go about the process of finding that identity, whether it be personal as a chef? Because I imagine when you're first getting into the culinary arts, you learn a lot of skills. And I've seen a lot of people as they're hopping into entrepreneurship, or they're trying to figure out what they do in life, just in general, to kind of make this applicable to anyone listening. Sometimes we have so many options and we want to do it
Hmm.
all. How can we
Right.
narrow that down?
So we're talking about a diner, or from a diner's perspective, or from an operator's perspective?
I'd say from an operator's perspective, kind of using the restaurant and the culinary arts as a metaphor to life, using the
Right.
advancement in the skill as an advancement to how we develop ourselves. Because I know a lot of folks who are doing a whole bunch of things and they're not necessarily an expert in one. They don't have that one dish yet.
Right. So so what I said earlier is your food has got to have a voice, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now we all know there's plenty of diners out there. There's plenty of cheesecake factories. There's plenty of TGIs. Those places like that do not have a voice, right? If you go into the TGI Fridays here or the one in Chicago, Illinois, it's going to feel the same. The food's going to be the same. Everything's going to be the same, right? That's why they're places like that. That's their goal, right? So if you want to have a unique, chef-driven, intriguing restaurant, and that doesn't mean expensive, but think about like that little pasta place in Gather, right? What is that? Naked Pasta,
Yeah.
right? Golly, that place has a voice. It's this guy has been working on noodles for years, and he's perfected his version of 4 or 5 different dishes. One of the things I try to talk operators out of is trying to be everything for everybody, and that's not going to win you raving fans, right? You've got to focus, and your food has to have a voice. There's a great little place in Malden called the Low Country Shrimper, right? I mean, where can you get a fried oyster po' boy in this town, right? Well, I think there's 2 places that I know of, and one of them is the Low Country Shrimper. Now it's kind of I mean, I wouldn't say it's a dive, but it's nondescript location, but it's a cool place, and you go in there and you feel welcome, and it's full of smiling faces and, well, smiling eyes right now behind the mask, and they've got this cool kind of Southern Alabama style of fried seafood restaurant that really works for them. And you don't go in there for a pimento cheeseburger. You don't go in there for Caesar salad or whatever. Um, he's that place has got a really cool voice that works in that space. So
Yeah.
the food goes with the hospitality, goes with the owner, the whole thing just works perfectly. So I think that's the trick if you want to have something above and beyond just feeding people. Because
Yeah.
if you just going to open up something to feed people, you're not going to enjoy what you're doing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I use that question to kind of set up your story in terms of having a voice and having that uniqueness that stands out. Because as we discussed a little bit about your backstory, I'd love for you to kind of pull the listeners into the start of your culinary journey. Because I think we mentioned going down the path of being an attorney and you altered that What was that like, breaking the news to your family, to your folks, and then taking that jump to go down a different path than what most would have expected?
Well, I broke my dad's heart. God rest his soul. I mean, my dad was an attorney and then a judge, and me being his oldest son, it was just a given,
Mhm.
But this country has half the world's attorneys. We don't need any more attorneys, Ted. We have plenty,
Yeah.
you know,
We are
right?
well represented.
Right. So, I grew up in a big family. There was 5 of us, and grew up in South Louisiana. And my mom's cool. My mom grew up in Mexico. She was Texan. Her parents were Texans, right? But granddaddy was a professional cattle rancher. And so when she was like 1 year old, they moved to Durango, Mexico. And granddaddy managed a big ranch in Durango. So that's where mom grew up. And they had to do everything because, in Durango in the 1930s, it's not like you could jump in the car and drive down to Publix, that's,
Yeah.
they were 500 miles from a modern city. So they were very self-supporting. And so they did everything. And I think granddaddy had about 24 caballeros that came and went, was on a regular basis. And so grandma was she had her and another lady that helped her, and she was constantly cooking, constantly growing. They had one guy that hunted for the ranch, and so that's the atmosphere that my mom grew up in, right?
Yeah.
So when I was a kid, my mom was always cooking, even though she was usually working too. She was a nurse. And me being the middle child, I kind of gravitated towards, being helpful, I guess. And that meant time in the kitchen. And I can remember being a little kid and, making bread from scratch. Mom made bread from scratch, and she cooked all this cool Mexican stuff, which in South Louisiana, I was the outlier,
Yeah.
Everybody else's mom. You remember when you were a little kid and like if your friend's mom was cooking something cool, you'd make an excuse for going over to Billy's house or whatever because Billy's mom was making whatever, cheeseburgers, whatever you wanted that night, and your mom, you didn't like what your mom was fixing. So anyway, in South Louisiana, everybody's mom was cooking andouille or gumbo or whatever, and my mom would be making, chicken enchiladas or mole poblano or something like that. So I grew up in this cool environment where, I saw these 2 distinct different cuisines, and that really set me on that path. And when I was in college, I started cooking at a couple of nondescript restaurants, it was kind of a college town. And but I loved being back there and putting things together and trying to figure out if I can, how can you make this better? How can you make that better? What can I do tomorrow that I didn't do today that would make the job a little bit more efficient or whatever? And so when I had a degree in English Lit and told my dad that I wanted to go to culinary school and not law school, and off I went without his blessing.
What was that reaction like?
Oh, you don't want to know. Yeah, I don't. So my dad, my dad grew up in Florida. He did not grow up with his natural parents. His father died when he was very young, and his mother shipped him off to the aunt and uncle in Florida. And the aunt and uncle had a diner in Florida, in Tampa. And so when my dad was a little kid, he washed dishes every 5 days a week for 5 years straight or something. So when I said I want to be a cook, right? That's
Bad
all
memories.
my dad could think of, right?
Bad memories, yeah. So when you got on the journey, I think it's interesting because a lot of times it sounds like you've been surrounded by food your whole life, and I didn't even know the story of your dad having that background as well. Do you think you were almost, I guess, pre-exposed to coming into that culinary experience? Was it something, I mean, spending time in the kitchen, it sounds like you spent a lot of your life surrounded by it, but it wasn't until later in life you decided to take that jump. Is that something you think you were prepped for?
Yeah, I mean, I was lucky that my mom had that childhood experience, that young adult experience of growing up in such an environment.
Yeah.
And so she didn't like the idea of taking shortcuts. So if she was going to make something, she was going to make something, right?
Hmm.
So even if she'd been on her feet for 9 hours at the hospital, she'd come home. She had already planned out what dinner was going to be, and the stuff was already there. She was not one for, shooting from the hip, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so when she shopped, she kind of planned it out. Well, this will be Tuesday, this will be Wednesday, this will be Thursday, and so this is what I need. And then when I was I can remember being in college and cooking. Now, got to keep in mind that in South Louisiana, we all cook, right? Everybody cooks. Um, but I can remember being in college, and I would cook for the dorm one night. I'd say, hey, I had little appliances in my in the dorm room, and hey, guys, I'm cooking tonight. What do y'all, everybody chip in a couple dollars, and then we just sit around, and I'd cook for 6 or 8 guys or whatever. I'd do that a couple times a month. And then I can remember I was probably like a junior in college, and I remember turning on the Today Show, and darn if Paul Prudhomme, right, probably our country's first celebrity chef, he's on TV on the Today Show cooking sweet potatoes and redfish. And sweet potatoes in South Louisiana, that was something that you bought on the side of the darn highway. It was not fancy food at all, right? And he had made sweet potato hash, and he's putting black and redfish on top of it, and on the darn Today Show. And this is, I mean, cooks or chefs on TV, that was so rare back then. And I can remember watching him, and Paul Prudhomme at the time, he was pushing 400 pounds. I mean, he was a big guy.
Yeah.
And he was the antithesis of what you typically saw on TV as far as a celebrity goes, right? And it's like, look at this guy. He's enormous. He's got this funky South Louisiana accent, and he's cooking sweet potatoes, and the audience loves him, and he's on the Today Show, and he's getting all this press, and that really kind of put the light on. The light went on, and I was like, I think I can do this.
Nice.
So that's what really pointed me down that road.
What was the journey like after seeing that and jumping into the culinary experience? I know we talked about traveling and starting a new life in Charleston and things. I'd love to jump into that for the viewers really quick, in terms of making a career out of it, because a lot of us have this passion, have this thing that we've grown and we've worked on, and we've tampered with our recipe for so long. And here we are starting to present it to the world. What are some of the challenges that you had to overcome as you're making this a career and a living?
Well, probably my big challenge was that I was always when I was younger, I was always looking for another parent, right? And maybe that's a question for my therapist, but anyway. So in the independent restaurants, I ended up in a series of independent restaurants where a year and a half here, a year and a half there, a year and a half there, never quite finding my way, right?
Yeah.
And one was kind of Charleston food, one was kind of Myrtle Beach fried fish food, another one was kind of quasi-Italian, and so all I was doing was following somebody else's formula, right? So if you fancy yourself a cook that's going somewhere that's one day going to receive accolades from the press and from bloggers and from traditional and non-traditional media, then you really need to hone in on what, those career decisions, where you work, they really need to make sense for you, for where you envision yourself 5 and 10 years down the road for your 10-year goal.
Yeah.
And I didn't really have that for a while. And that kind of, so if you don't, I think it's, then you get into an environment in a busy restaurant where it's easy to fall into that habit of drudgery where it's like, oh, I got to go to work and we're going to be busy and, oh, this is going to be terrible. And, you're getting the job done, but you're not really vested.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that was my big struggle. And that would be my advice to a young cook is like, does this particular job make sense for your 5-year, 10-year goal?
Yeah. Something you said that just sparked a question in me when you mentioned, if you're like, oh, got to go to work, and you go there and you're not really invested or whatnot. And I think this could transcend to almost any industry that someone might be working. But specifically, right, when we're talking in being a chef and culinary arts, if you're going to work every day, you're not really invested. Do you think people can taste the difference in the food?
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, it depends if you've been to, John's Grill every month, and then that 5th month you go there and it's not quite right. The food doesn't really reach out and grab you. Nothing really says, wow, maybe, I don't know, maybe the chef is not feeling it. Maybe he's been away. Maybe there's been a, culture change or something like that. That's hopefully that's when they call me, right?
Yeah. No, I love that. And I asked that question on purpose because I think, you hear all the time, oh, you could taste the love in it. You could taste the
Right.
love in the food and everything. And it's almost as if, quite frankly, you can taste the love in the work that someone does. And when someone perfects their recipe and you eat that dish that, someone put their time and their expertise into it, you could actually taste that on the other end. And that goes for more than just cooking. It goes for, if there are days I know where I go on air at my station and I know I'm probably not delivering the newscast the way I typically do. I'm not at my best today. And I think everyone has those days. It's okay. But when it's a day in and day out occurrence, that's when it's maybe time to revisit that 5-year plan or what you're in it for, and really kind of what you're working towards and moving forward towards.
Yeah, that's good though. If you're introspective, if you know that you weren't up to par, that's really good. Because then you can look back and say, all right, how can I avoid that? What can I do better tomorrow?
Yeah. And I love that. I actually wrote that down. You said, what can I do tomorrow that I didn't do today? And I think a lot of us can learn from that moving forward, because so many of us get comfortable in a craft, or we get comfortable where we are. Oh, I make good food. People are coming, they're eating. I'm good. But that is definitely not a good habit to be in. Where do you think, I guess for you, where was the turn in your career for you as you're starting to find your way? When did that kind of come, and what was, I guess, the feedback you saw in your life as a result of it?
All right. So I was chef at Augusta Grill. That was my first job here, my first real chef job here in Greenville, right? Mm-hmm. Augusta Grill on 1818 Augusta Street, right? And they were doing this kind of quasi-city New American food, right? And so I'm there a year and a half, maybe 2 years of my 5-year journey there, right? And I can remember talking to one of my guys, my sous chef, Robert. I was looking at a Food and Wine magazine, and there was, who was it? Was this chef from Dallas, Dean Fearing, who was a big deal for like 10, 15 years, right? And I hated looking at Dean Fearing. It was like every darn food magazine, every month, Dean Fearing, right? Now, the guy was a chef at this gorgeous restaurant in this beautiful hotel. It's called the Mansion on Turtle Creek. He was too darn good looking for his own good, right? I mean, he had a smile like yours, this beautiful smile. And then you pick up this magazine, and here was this handsome, smiling chef doing this gorgeous food. But at the same time, it's just like, don't these people have anybody else to write about? What's going on here,
Yeah.
And so, and I really started to think about it, and I usually journal in the morning, and so I realized that the guys, it wasn't just Dean, it was like 5 or 6 guys, right, that the food magazines were always writing about, and they were doing food that was very specific to their region, right? And they were seeking out. I mean, back then, we didn't have a farmer's market or anything like that. You had to go find farmers and go drag them kicking and screaming into to the restaurant. So that's what I started doing. It was just like, I'm not doing anything that says Greenville, South Carolina. No wonder,
Yeah.
I mean, I knew I was probably never going to be on the cover of Food and Wine, but maybe there's a reason why. It wasn't because he was so handsome or whatever, but it was because he was doing something really cool with the raw ingredients of a 50-mile radius.
Yeah.
And that's what really hit me, that was something I wasn't doing,
Yeah.
and if I was going to be true to myself, to my Southern roots, my Southern heritage, and all these great ingredients that we have in the upstate, I couldn't ignore them any longer, out with the portobello mushrooms, no more portobello mushrooms,
Yeah. So what was the feedback you got as you started being more true to yourself and incorporating some of those local ingredients and local cuisine into your dishes?
So that's where, after about 6 months of doing that, 7 months, I mean, I really, and I talked to the boss about it, the owner, and I said, hey, this has been bugging me, and I know we're busy, and I know we're successful, and the restaurant's making money, but I want to steer us into something more Southern, right?
Yeah.
And I want to start buying local ingredients, and I just want to get the word out, and so Bob was like, oh, okay, let's give it a shot, and I think it was like 6 months in, and I got a letter from, back then, Gourmet Magazine. People would write Gourmet Magazine. So if you and your fiance go, to wherever, you go to LA and you have this great dish, then the way to get the recipe was you would write Gourmet and say, hey, I was in LA, had this amazing dish, this thing with the snappers and the baby leeks and the brown butter and whatever. Can you get the recipe for me? So then they would reach out to that chef, and then that recipe may or may not appear in Gourmet. They had one section, a travel section, right? And so 6-7 months in, I got this little postcard from Gourmet, and right, and somebody had asked for a recipe for the spoon bread with country ham, and country ham, Vidalia onions, and spoon bread, right? And I was just like, I was going to pass out, right? I was like,
Yeah.
I'm doing something right.
Yeah, and you get that feedback.
Right, exactly. And that was a big deal. I mean, that was like, Ted, that was like 1997, 98.
Yeah.
I know.
Wow. Right. I'm trying to think. I might have been in grade school or just getting into
right.
No, I can't. But really quick, is I know we're coming towards the last few minutes of the podcast and stuff, but you've been in Greenville, South Carolina, Charleston, South Carolina. You've been here as really seeing the food, I guess the attention around the restaurants and just the food culture grow the past few years. And even Greenville, South Carolina is starting to get more attention as a foodie spot. What has that experience been like? Not kind of just watching it, but kind of also being pretty much almost at the center of it as it's growing all around you. How has that been, watching that develop these past 10, 20 years?
It's been cool, but something like that, it's a long process. So it's not exactly overnight.
Yeah.
And I was, I spent a couple years on a accommodations tax committee when we had our restaurant, and learning how all the money that the city collects, how they use that towards working on getting publicity for a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years down the road.
Hmm.
And so that's a long process, but it's also it was cool, and it was a lot of fun to be a part of it. And and I played a very small part, you know, and it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And we're still, it's going to come back. This whole 2020 mess is it'll go away soon enough,
Hmm.
um, and we'll be back to like things used to be.
Yeah.
I may not be here, but
I think you will. I want to ask, what do you think it is about food that brings people together?
it's a language, right? I mean, food is a language, and it's something that we can all agree on. You and I, we may differ in backgrounds and politics and religion and all this stuff, but we can sit down and have like a great meal together, and enjoy it, and all that stuff can just everything all those differences can evaporate into the ether when we're enjoying a meal. And I believe that's the oldest form of hospitality. In the Bible, there's all these great stories of hospitality, and they center around something as simple as bread, right?
Yeah.
Bread and olive oil and maybe wine. And
Hmm.
there's great instances in different cultures of hospitality and these beautiful stories, and they all take place around something as simple as bread and wine.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I think that's like the ultimate unifier is sitting around the table and eating. And I even remember reading somewhere they said, one of the best gestures a friend or a spouse or whatnot can do is the first time they contact you, they say, and I'm sure you've asked your friend, your spouse, or this before. It's like, hey, did you eat?
Right.
It's a simple gesture, like,
Right.
hey, let's feed each other, let's enjoy, break bread, and communicate a little bit more. I know you mentioned about kind of the hardships that this pandemic and everything has kind of brought on the food industry and so many people, and I know it's been very hard on a lot of the mom and pop shops too, those
Right.
locally owned restaurants and stuff. But I always love trying to finish off the podcast on a positive note. And I would ask this, moving forward as we're chasing our rainbows and we're looking ahead, hopefully towards the end of this pandemic sometime soon. What do you think is the best thing that can come about from this pandemic that we can learn when we're back out together?
Is to appreciate something as simple as a hug or smile or a pat on the back, or sharing bread and wine with a friend, a new friend or a familiar friend.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think so many people are missing that more now than ever. And it's ironic where we've talked about everything that's going on in the country, and we don't really touch on it on this podcast. But we're in a time where what so many people in this world need is a hug, communication, and some time to
Right.
sit down and break bread. And I appreciate the work you've done tirelessly in the food industry, the work you continue to do, and I cannot wait until we can break bread once again. As we mentioned before on the phone, you yourself working on doing a podcast, inviting folks to break bread and eat and have some wine.
Right.
It's really a great way to connect. So I'd look forward to connecting with you, John, when all this is over. But until then, I'd love to give our listeners and our watchers an opportunity to connect with you, reach out to you, and find out some of the work you're doing, and maybe even tune into your podcast as well. What's the best way they can find all that information?
So the podcast is Tin Roof Farm Radio Show, and I've been doing that for a couple years. And you can find me on Instagram at Chef John Malik, Malik. And you can I've got my own website where I put my original essays. You may have seen my latest one about moving to Belize.
Yeah, I saw that you posted that earlier.
Yeah, my wife and I were moving to Belize for a couple years. So we're
Nice.
going to rent out the farm, and the goal is down there is to. Well, I figured, Ted, that if I'm gonna sit around and be unemployed, then why not do it in Belize?
Sounds pretty nice. If only you could take me with you.
Hey, we're gonna have 2 bedrooms, so we'll have space for company.
Absolutely. Well, I'll make
But
sure
I'm
that.
gonna keep writing. I'm gonna keep writing while I'm down there, writing original essays, and hopefully, if the broadband is strong enough, I'll keep doing the podcast.
Awesome. Awesome. I'd love to kind of stay abreast of all that, what you're working on, and I'll make sure that folks can go into the show notes. I'll have the links to your website and your Instagram and stuff so folks can keep up with you. I look forward to seeing some pictures from Belize as well.
We can't wait. We're very excited.
Absolutely. Well, John, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Pleasure was all mine, sir.
Absolutely. And to the listeners, I just want to recap some of the nuggets and the tidbits that were dropped along the way on the podcast. First, of how your food should have a voice. It's important for a chef to know their recipe and make sure their food has a voice. But I also want to encourage everyone listening that you are a chef of your own life, and you need to have a voice. It's your personality, and tinkering with that recipe is required. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take time. And everything to everybody, you can't be everything to everybody. And that means the same for your spouse as well. It's a lot to ask of somebody, and it's a lot to take on when you try to do that or expect that. And I love it when John said, what can I do tomorrow that I didn't do today? If we spend each day trying to get a little better, that's our best way to grow. And little by little, if you improve 1% a day over the course of a year, that's 365% over that course of that year. I'd say that's doing pretty well. And then being true to yourself, as John was mentioning, and I'm sure a lot of us have experienced it, we know when we're doing something that doesn't serve our core purpose. We know when we're doing something that doesn't serve what is in our heart. And it's important to be introspective and reflective in those moments and really kind of try and hone in. And as John mentioned in his story, you'd be amazed to know the feedback. You'd be amazed to see the feedback that happens when you really kind of embrace what's true to you and start taking the risk and practicing that a little bit. And food being a language. John, I think you hit the nail on the head with that one. I can't wait to break bread and connect again sometime, maybe in Belize. I know after getting married, the fiance wants to travel a lot. So I might be calling you sooner rather than later.
We'll make it happen.
Absolutely. John, thanks again. And to the viewers and the listeners, as we always say at the end of the episode, everybody wants the sunshine, but they don't want the rain. But you can't have the pleasure without a little pain. Let's grow.
Right, let's grow.
The No Rain, No Rainbows podcast is recorded at Camaraderie, a collective workspace in Greenville, South Carolina, right off the Swamp Rabbit Trail. If you're looking for a place to grow your business, network with other professionals, and establish your own workspace, Camaraderie is the place to do so.